Record here. Okay, cool. Hello, everybody. This is President Foxman, and this is Company, and we are doing our little book club over chapters of Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton. We're on chapter 3 now. You can kind of go with these in any order, so feel free to just stick along. And I'm just going to do a little bit of a reading from a section toward the end of the chapter, and then we'll kind of pick up from there and just talk about this. So this section goes, in case the point is not clear, a historic example may illustrate it. The French Revolution was really a heroic and decisive thing, because the Jacobins willed something definite and limited. They desired the freedoms of democracy, but also all of the vetoes of democracy. They wished to have votes and not to have titles. Republicanism had an ascetic side in Franklin or Robespierre, as well as an expansive side in Danton or Wilkes. Therefore, they've created something with a solid substance and shape, the square social equality and peasant wealth of France. But since the revolution or speculative mind of Europe has been weakened by shrinking from any proposal because of the limits of that proposal, liberalism has been degraded into liberality. Men have tried to revolutionize from a transitive to an intransitive verb. The Jacobin could tell you not only the system he would rebel against, but what was more important, the system he would not rebel against, and the system he would trust. But the new rebel is a skeptic, and will not entirely trust anything. He has no loyalty, therefore he can never really be a revolutionist. And the fact that he doubts everything really gets in the way when he wants to denounce anything. For all denunciation implies a moral doctrine of some kind, and the modern revolutionist doubts not only the institution he denounces, but the doctrine by which he denounces it. Thus, he writes one book complaining that the imperial oppression insults the purity of women. Then he writes another book about the sex problem, in which he insults it himself. He curses the Sultan because Christian girls lose their virginity, and then he curses Mrs. Grundy because they keep it. As a politician, he will cry out that the war is a waste of life, and then as a philosopher, that all life is a waste of time. A Russian pessimist will denounce a policeman for killing a peasant, and then prove by the highest and philosophical principles that the peasant ought to have killed himself. A man denounces marriage as a lie and then denounces aristocratic profligates for treating it as a lie. He calls a flag a bauble and then blames the oppressors of Poland or Ireland because they take away that bauble. The man of this school goes first to a political meeting where he complains that savages are treated as if they were beasts. Then he takes his hat and umbrella and goes on to a scientific meeting where he proves that they practically are beasts. In short, the modern revolutionist, being an infinite skeptic, is always engaged in undermining his own minds. In his book on politics, he attacks men for trampling on morality. In his book on ethics, he attacks morality for trampling on men. And therefore, the modern man in revolt has become practically useless for all purposes of revolt. By rebelling against everything, he has lost his right to rebel against anything. Okay, quite a mouthful, but I think that captures at least a good section of what this chapter covers. But I wanted to open it up to you two about kind of what were your takeaways from this chapter?
You got something, Mr. Drake?
Let me think about that one for a second. I'm not very good in the spot. I did have thoughts.
A couple things pop in my mind. One is vanity of vanities. There's nothing new under the sun, you know. Just as true today as it was 120 years ago. Yeah, this is an area where when I was deeply reading Carl Jung helped me immensely in that the person is, or the situation can be understood from the perspective of trying to understand the focus of the subject or the subject themselves. So what I mean by that is, so let's say there's a denouncing going on, or there's a protest going on or something. And so you could look at the protest, or you could look at the subjects who are promoting or prompting the protest. And I find the latter, looking at the subject first, kind of that person first approach, sheds much more light than what is the line from Christ where it's the eye is the lamp of, I forget the exact, I can look it up, but the eye, you know, the eye of a person is the lamp of the person, and if their eye is filled with darkness, then you know, anything they see will be filled with darkness. And I think it's, you know, I had the tendency when I was in adolescent, you know, when I remember 9/11. I was not against going into Afghanistan. But then when we went into Iraq, I was suspicious. I wouldn't say, like, it would be flattering of myself to say that I was like properly against going into Iraq, but I was suspicious, and I was a huge fan of Green Day's American Idiot album. More than any other album, the American Idiot album captured me. Like, in my adolescence, it was a great album. Like, it actually tells a great story. Uh, but just that sense of the top-down narrative being all that, you know, what is adopted by most people. Yeah, like you could play that album today and it would just apply in the complete opposite way. You know, the only thing that's changed is instead of a top-down narrative, it's a bottom-up, but it's still not that. Um, what am I saying with this? There's the desire to be on the right side of history in all things, but there's not a desire to know why it is the right side of history, or to know even whether it is the right side of history. There's a man.
Well,
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
one
I'm
thing
kind of
that
rambling.
Chesterton kind of starts out with is this. Well, he sets it up really interestingly, because he starts out talking about virtues and the virtues unleashed. He points that as the problem of our society in this chapter. He says, well, when you have something that's so society breaking as the Reformation, you just kind of unleash all these virtues, and they're not tied to one another, and so you just have charity, but charity without humility or anything else grounding it. And that's where he puts in this unleashed humility is kind of the problem, and it's the doubt of the wrong things and the confidence in the wrong things. And I think all of that's kind of built on the aims. He talks about, let me just read this.
Yeah, no. It's on page 27. At least on my copy, it's page 27.
Modesty has moved from the organ of ambition. Modesty has settled on the organ of conviction. And so
where it was never meant to be.
Yes.
I'm going to keep going because I think it's a really good passage. So a man was meant to be doubtful about himself, but undoubting about the truth. And this has been exactly reversed. Nowadays, the part of a man that a man does assert is exactly the part he ought not to assert himself. The part he doubts is exactly the part he ought not to doubt, the divine reason. If I could frame this in a way that makes sense to me, what we doubt now is that there's any purpose to our being or our life or our existence. And that's the wrong doubt. The act of faith is assuming that whatever put us here, whatever created all this, it's far greater, far better, full of far more goodness than we can imagine, and that we are meant to play the game as best we can. And when I say game, I mean life. So that's what we're meant to doubt is our capacity to play the game properly in the moment and be course correcting continuously. That our own insufficiency is going to mess up the game as we play it. But to doubt the nature of what we are in itself, it's a fool's errand. You know, it's like actually this happens today because it's the video game player who's in the middle of a game and it's like, why am I even playing this game? But still continues to play it for 4 hours, 10 hours, whatever. And they're like, I should be doing something better. It's like, yeah, maybe, but keeps playing the game. It's like it doesn't really matter anyway. Like everything's lukewarm. So
Well,
anyway,
and I think it's really key to notice that I think the modesty on the aims or the on the conviction, the doubt of that is only one half of it. It's also the lack of doubt on your own what does he say?
Your own will, maybe? Are we talking about the will discussion
On,
that comes later?
on the ambition. It went
Hmm.
so we no longer worry about the ambition. Like the ambition, your effort is always enough. It's always it's a lack of doubting your effort. I think he puts this to words in the same way.
here's one
Yeah.
line. But the new skeptic is so humble that he doubts if he can even learn.
Hmm. And so it's now a problem with the environment and not with you. You know, at this point, it's no longer something that can change in you. You are almost unchanging yourself. That you are exactly who you need to be, but the world is so broken around you that it can't hold you anymore. And so I think this is where Chesterton's saying, "Oh, that's the complete opposite of what it's been. What it's been is people change, are learning, are growing in response because they know that something is going to be on the other end of it. But now, if you don't know what's on the other end of it and you lack the humility to change, then it's it destroys all thought. It's a dead end."
Ironically, to kind of go to a more how I kind of related to it, I suppose. I definitely, definitely sort of felt like this lack of, I've definitely struggled with this sort of impulse to just doubt, you know, the direction that I'm striving towards, I suppose. Um, a lot of my peers have kind of struggled with that as well, and even in recent times, I suppose that it's, I've been hubristic in sort of thinking that like I am somehow sort of through engaging with, say, the corner, engaging with Chesterton, somehow transcending that instinct to just sort of curl up into, you know, like nihilism, like, oh, what am I even doing? You know, like what am I doing? What am I striving towards? I still struggle with that. Like
Mhm.
this week was quite tough for me, and I found times where, despite I don't know, despite um, all the new ideas that I'm taking in, there's just this just supreme doubt as to like, what am I doing? Is this even worth it? And again, it's not exactly the right question per se.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
I just deeply related um to this chapter. I've kind of been in like both positions where it's like the over intellectualizing, say, like oh no, um I've deconstructed basically everything. What do I even do at this point? I've kind of destroyed every through my suspicions, have essentially destroyed every rock that I used to hold on to, even if my foundation wasn't even really that strong to begin with. And then on the other hand, um, kind of descending into that mode of like, to paraphrase, screw it, let's just go through with it, the F it, we ball mentality, where that doesn't necessarily work either. Like, yeah, I've put effort in, but have I grown from it? That was mainly my thought process through this. Not
yeah.
even touching upon sort of more current, say, sociopolitical analysis that is kind of the first line of analysis that I'm sure many people would have when reading this. Which is why I kind of had to think about what I was going to say. I wanted to let somebody else kind of push that along, let's say.
I've got two thoughts.
Let's go.
One is that screw it, I'm going to do it anyway attitude. I am that is that is the right attitude.
It's a very good
Because
attitude, but like if
yeah,
you sort of push it too far, it's kind of like you get into that mode where it's like it almost turns into the anything that I do is right because I'm doing it. I feel
Yes,
but I think it doesn't fall into the same trap.
fair.
Yeah.
I'll let it go back, but I think that's why Chesterton has a problem with Nietzsche, not Joan of Arc.
Yes.
And I think we'll get into that, I think, too. But
Yeah, it's like it's like you give yourself permission to doubt everything except your own doubts. And that fuck you is the doubting your own doubts. It's like, yeah,
Hmm.
okay, I know you're there. Fuck you. We're going.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do it anyway. Um,
Right.
but I know I get it that sometimes it's a hubristic thing. I can give you my experience with game development. So back in, and do you mind like a very probably 5 minute tangent, Noah? Is that okay?
go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So back in let me think, 2018, I had this idea for a story and it wouldn't go away. And it really bothered me because it was an immoral story. Like it was like I was simultaneously going through a lot of stuff and bringing me closer to my faith and strengthening my faith, but simultaneously I had this story idea that just like would not go away, and it got stronger and stronger within me, and it was immoral, and I was like, I was thinking about this and praying about the story. I was like, if I write this story, like if it's successful, everyone hates me. Like it's just like the worst. Like it's gonna piss off everyone. It's not gonna be successful. But if and it just wouldn't go away. And finally, I said, okay, I'm gonna start writing it. So I got up an hour or 2 hours earlier every morning, and I would just force myself to write for that first hour of the day. And I did that for about a year, and then it gets to probably late 2019 at this point. And as I'm writing it, I'm like, ah, geez, this is better as a game, as a video game, because I'm like, people don't read stories anymore, or our generation, like the kids, the young young men I'm trying to tell this story for, they yeah, we don't get our primary means of receiving stories is not through novels anymore. It's
Right.
through video games. Like that was my for me growing up. It was through amazing stories of video games. And so I'm writing this thing, and I'm like, oh man, I failed out of computers. My father was a computer programmer. My older brother is now passed away. Was absolutely brilliant computer programmer. Um, I failed out. I didn't fail out, but like I got a D in data structures, second computer science course I ever took in college. Like I retook it and I got an A, but like I was not a programmer. I couldn't translate the syntax. Like I couldn't do that on the screen to what I wanted to have in the system. Logic was fine, but and as I'm so I'm it's like one of these underlying failings that I've had in my life, and where especially in contrast to my older brother and my father, who are so good at it. And so like I'm writing this thing, and I have this like realization that's like, oh man, it's better as a game. And I'm thinking to myself, like, even if I can figure out how to make a game, it's going to take 10 years for me to do this. But the other voice in the back of my head is like, you got something better to do
Mm.
for 10 years.
That's the
And
key
I'm
question.
okay. So then COVID hits March 2020, and I'm almost done writing the game or writing the story. And I have kind of three things I'm dreading. One was that like maybe I start developing and sorry, maybe I start doing it and I fail. Like I'm just once again I'm insufficient. I can't figure it out. I'm not smart enough. Doubt. Okay, that was the second one I was dreading. That was the first one. Second one was, um, maybe I start doing it, but like I hate it. Like maybe I just hate it. And it's like, then what? Like I need something, uh, and there was a third one, but I forget what it was. So and I started doing it, and it was really slow going. But after like 3 or 4 months, I really was enjoying it. And then, but every time I would get to a point where I would realize whatever I'm working on in game development is like, this is not going to work. Like it was too complex. It was like, and I would go through a period of like maybe 2 or 3 weeks of like despair. Like everything I've been doing for the last 2 months, like or like last 6 months was like pointless and like a waste of time. And then another part of me would be like, no, it's not. You're learning a lot all the time. Like the question, I stopped worrying about the outcome and I started thinking about it in terms of like, am I loving the product? Like, do I look
Mm,
forward to doing the game development itself? And it was like, yes, like this is a lot of fun. When I'm alone, it's like this is the thing I really enjoy doing. And then as time went on, I got better and better at like failing at it. And I've still been failing at it. However, the thing that's going now is better, but we'll probably still fail. Anyway, uh the but the question was like, is it good in and of itself and isn't enjoyable, and stop worrying about the outcome and stop trying to get something. And but the more, I don't know. I guess I'll say I was able to trust the process more and more as time goes on and not worry so much about like what's the point or what's the outcome. Because really the fundamental question was like, is gaming, is telling stories through games a good thing? And that is a leap of faith, but I will affirmatively say yes, because there are certain games that have captured me and called to me over the years. And I think have been a really positive impact on my life.
mm,
Um, but anyway, I mean, that's just one thing, but I think that's the case for any practice where you're like, what's the point? Sorry, that I don't know what
right.
that has to do with Chesterton or anything,
I
but
I think it's quite relevant. It's that, well, I mean, it to me, one of the links that it kind of brought up was, um, well, first off, that whole thing about, the French Revolution, it's at least had some idea of what system they would go for. Like you have this conviction that video game storytelling is worth it. You're not just blanket rejecting all other, or I mean, you could blanket embrace all other forms of storytelling, but you have this one specific aim that you're kind of going for. And I agree. I think that that's important. I think that I mischaracterized the F it we ball mentality, um in a sense. Um I'm also thinking about, you're kind of having to come to grips with the frame, as it were, the limitations of video games as an art form, say, like the constraints that, like, narratively you might have to go through because it's an interactive medium, and sort of trying to go against it kind of turns the video game into something else. Much like trying to convince a triangle, say, that it should stop having three sides is destroying the triangle. So I
or a
think
gir
that,
or a
or a
giraffe with
giraffe.
a short neck stops being a
Yeah,
giraffe. See, we did do the reading,
we
sir.
did do
Yeah.
the
President.
reading. We did do the reading. My goodness. But um I think that's the right track. I've also very much very much struggled with, I suppose the term that kept coming up again and again was sort of analysis paralysis. I think
Mhm.
that's a term that comes up a lot for me. I've had to do a little bit of like self sort of looking from a distance and going like, yeah, this is a process that happens, and I'm sure that everybody can identify where it's like, yeah, I'm really overanalyzing this. I should really just buckle down and do it. I do that as a, somebody who writes as a hobby all the time. Life choices. I've recently, within this year, had to make a fairly substantial set of life choices as to my future, and all throughout, even now, there are these doubts that have come up, but just sort of sticking with it. I feel like we have kind of veered off the topic a little
No,
bit, but
I
we're
think it's
also very much on topic.
It's really good.
I wanted to bring it over to um I don't know, something like permission to be wrong is something that's
Mm,
coming to my mind.
yeah, right.
Like I don't know. I think the story of Saint Christopher is like super key in part of understanding this. And going back to how the story goes, I'll just tell like a quick version of it. That Saint Christopher, depending on, he's a monster, he's just a really strong guy, whatever your tradition leans towards. And he is looking for just the strongest person to serve. And so he searches the land and he finds this great king eventually. And he's like, this guy is strong. So he follows him, and he's doing everything that the king tells him to do, some horrible stuff or whatever, but he's doing it. And then in his time working there, he hears that the king is afraid of someone. So he's like, "Oh, the king is afraid of someone. I thought he was the strongest person." So he asks the king, like, "Oh, who are you afraid of?" And the king said, "No, I'm not going to tell you. You're going to leave me and serve him." And Christopher said, "No, I'm not going to do that." He said, "Okay, well, it's Satan. I'm afraid of the Dark Lord." And Christopher takes all his stuff and he leaves to go serve Satan. So he goes to Satan, offers his loyalty, and works in his army. And then he finds out that Satan one day is afraid of someone. And so he's like, "Well," he goes to Satan. He's like, "Oh, who are you afraid of?" And he says, "I'm not going to tell you. You're going to leave me and serve him." And he says, "No, don't worry. I won't leave. I'll stay and continue to work for you as long as you tell me who it is." And he says, "Well, it's God." And so then he goes out and he leaves and takes everything with him to go find out how he can serve God. And so I think that's the same thing, where it's like, even in his pursuit of something that in itself is not completely good, like the quest for power or powerful, whoever has the most power to serve them, he ends up in the right place in the end. Even if it goes in a really horrible kind of curve, he ends up going into the right spot. And so this idea of like, I don't know, Christopher in mindlessly following this one thing, in the end, refusing to kind of settle in any spot, but trying to follow this progression, finds himself in the right spot. And so in the same way that Joan of Arc is like following down this road like a thunderbolt, that, same thing with Christopher. He's following down this road, and maybe it's just following down the road that's the important part, and not being willing to stand at the crossroads and just spend all your day there, just, mindlessly going about.
Like this 600-page thing that I wrote and never, it hasn't come to fruition in any regard. However, I find myself, so I go back to it now, and a lot of it is what's the word? Chaff. McMo's chaffed legs. But some of it is really good. Some of it I'm blown away by. Like, I was like, oh man, this could only come from a Neil that's in a creative illness. That's the psychological term that Jung used, creative illness. You could look that up, Drake. It's a good term to look up. Because it's some of it that is so good that it's stuff that I'm like, I couldn't have come up with this now. But that's the 20% compared to the 80% that is chaff. But like, I'm not in any hurry to put that stuff to use, because it's going to present itself, not in my time. It's outside of my control when the opportunities to make my thing. And I think this is the case in all of our lives. Like the things that we think are wasted, or it's like, man, I didn't do anything all those years. Those are opportunities that God has the ability to write into our story in a positive way. And we can't see it. But sometimes we can see it after the fact. So I call those God winks. I got to figure out who said God winks first. I don't know if that was McMo or no. Somebody far more polished.
Intelligent and handsome. Yeah, most likely. I mean, chances are they are going to be more intelligent and slightly more handsome, maybe.
I'm 25% Polish. So
what have I
there you go.
missed? Have we erred on the side of egoism or on philanthropy?
No, I think we've just been kind of dealing with thinking about Drake put it, analysis paralysis.
Oh, yeah.
Being stuck on the crossroads, being over doubtful of your own aims. That's been kind of where we've been hanging out.
The intellectual's disease.
Yeah. I want to talk about, this is on page 25, at least of my copy, but I don't know if you read it, Noah, but it says the modern world is not evil. In some ways, the modern world is far too good. It is full of wild and wasted virtues. I want to talk about that statement, because that's probably an area where I disagree with a lot of people in the corner. Like, a lot of people in the corner sort of bemoan the modern world and say, like, oh, look at, whether it's like the capitalism or the fall away from Christendom or, woe is me, everything. And I'm in the PVK camp. Like I like the modern world. I think it's pretty amazing. And I think the mystical in the left side of our brain is still there and able to be rediscovered uh if someone is deliberate and careful and is humbled in some way, shape, or form. And so I prefer that humbling comes from within out versus forcibly imposed outward in. And so, that's that's my thinking on the modern world. I'm insanely grateful for it is crazy hot here in New Orleans today. I've got air conditioning, I've got electricity. I'm talking to you guys in different states. This should not be possible. Yet I have friends that are, yeah, like it shouldn't be possible. Thanks be to God, So anyway, so what do you
It is
guys think of that statement?
possible.
I'll read it again. The modern world is not evil. In some ways, the modern world is far too good. Thoughts?
Yeah, just I guess it depends a lot on what you mean by the modern world. Um, that I don't think. Yeah, I struggle with some of this portion of Chesterton. Like for this chapter, I feel like the first kind of 45. I was going to say 45 minutes. Um, the first like 3/4 of the chapter, uh, I'm kind of like, I see where you're going and I accept it, but there's some leaps that he makes where he says like unbridled vices. And I'm like, I think that rhetorically, that's another instance where rhetorically it's so powerful, so powerfully said. I'm not sure if the scope of its reality matches the power of its rhetorical might. Um, I think for some people, yes, and specifically when he talks about like uh the ways in which you can think yourself out of thinking and feel your way out of feeling and will your way out of willing, and how all those are ultimately idols. Like I agree with him there, but I think that you know humanity is so varied and there's such a interlocking of idols that happens, and then you have the whole category of people who are like basically not in the game, like NPCs or something, like which I don't believe in them. I don't think that they're actually out there. I think that everybody is, but I do think that people can fool themselves into not living their own life. Um, and so yeah, like, and what those people do, I don't, you know, I think it's very difficult to describe, the movements of the herd. Like you can kind of feel them when you bump up against them, either on the outside or the inside. You can kind of feel the barriers, but like it's such an amorphous globular thing. The when we think of like and this is to try to pull it back to like the modern world, is another one of these phrases where it's like, well, the Amish are technically a part of the modern world. Um, and so yeah, I'm that's the thing where I'm like struggling, I guess, but he also kind of describes this when he talks about like at the beginning when he says that some he's quoting somebody else, but it says like the world goes on in this unchanging, it's like the belief in progress thing, where it's
The
like the
grooves of
only
change.
yeah, the only unchanging thing is this like warned like this route of change. But yeah, so like I guess in summary, I'm still kind of not certain. It feels to me like that idea of the vices, or not the vices, but the virtues kind of unleashed and sprawling and not in their proper place. Like if all he means there is the way in which we can make them an idol, I think I agree with him. But it's a more interesting thought, and I guess I can't think it yet, which is what it would actually look like for true virtue to um run rampant. Like, and I'm thinking of like courage and honesty, and generosity. Like I don't see, there's a lot of people who would take up those virtues as a mantle, you know, and I would probably, those are the same types of people that like put the in this home we believe in XXXX you know, sign on their front lawn. You know, and it's a lot of those same people, the kind of soft liberal. I think, you know, I think of the movie Get Out, you know, like where it's like these nice, friendly people, you know, like maybe that's an instance of it. But even still, that's like, yeah, I guess I'm stuck with the like, I still think more virtue better. So if there's more virtue, then I don't see how that can be a bad thing other than rhetorically it works that like, because those people that I'm trying to refer to, the I just keep thinking of like white Democrats. Uh, my wife just said rude. She herself a white Democrat, only part white, less white than me. Um, but that's why I know I can just talk shit about it because you know my voice has no merit in those circles. Um,
Well, let me ask you this question because T Grog asked this on a stream, and I have an answer in mind, but I'm curious your thoughts. So he
okay,
asked, "Do you think Christians are more moral than your average person?"
more moral than your average person. I reject the arena of the question.
It's not
It's
mine. It's T Grog.
right. Well, this is what I would say to T Grog too. Um, I don't believe in the like blind elephant game because the metaphor. My wife is like furiously texting me saying that I made false statements about her gender and not her gender, her race. Uh, I didn't. We'll check the tapes later, I guess. She's like, don't put that on the internet. All right. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. All right. Okay. So I reject the arena of the question in the same way that, you know, in order to say that like all the religions are the same and like the Buddhists have the tail of the elephant and, you know, the Christians have the leg and the, you know, like that it's all, everything's pointing to one. Um, I reject the stance from which I would be able to judge all of Christians and all of the rest, all of humanity. I refuse to put myself in the place of Kant, not Kant. Yeah, Kant.
No, yeah, yeah.
The moral imperative. You know, like I that's not for me to decide. Judge not lest you be judged.
Amen.
So that's kind of where I would say with it. And I would say that like as far as I can tell, most people are much better morally than I am.
Well, this is the funny part about the question is that I mean it's telling that it comes from T Grog because he's our materialist friend over here who is very much in the route of like how can we categorize this like precisely. So we're gonna have this thing called morality where you know it's the equivalent of like you know you could take somebody's temperature and you could be like oh this person is more moral than the next person. Like what does that even mean?
We're going to
points.
we're going to quantify the virtues. Each cardinal virtue from 1 to 7 or 1 to 9 will be measured on a numeric scale
I'm fairly
for
certain
each
that's
person.
impossible. But
What's your goodness quotient?
but for professional reasons, I will leave that one alone. But you know, it's the same kind of. I mean, for T Grog, it's the same type of rhetorical move that like a preacher might do, like an old Southern Baptist preacher, which is his context. So is mine. It's probably why he rubs me the wrong way because we're probably like too similar, you know. But like, I think his point there is to say something like, if this were real, wouldn't it have the effect of making the people who believed it better?
Mhm.
And doesn't it say something that I, as this godless nihilist who thinks you just go to sleep and it's like anesthesia, you don't, you know, you just lose consciousness, it just fades away. That like, doesn't it say something that, you know, that I see myself as better than you? You know, like at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, I think, because I think that he's trying to, you know, well, there's a lot of things I could say about T Grog. I really enjoy when he gets on streams though.
Mm.
Like it really does make the it changes the conversation and he's much better on camera than he is in the comments. I have a harder time being mean to him when he's on when I could see his face. But why did you bring that up, Neil? Like the
Well, I mean,
in
it
regards
was
to this.
related. It was related to you saying, I think what would the world look like if we were all just more virtuous in one way, shape, or form? And um, I see God as a very sneaky, a wonderfully sneaky storyteller, like wonderfully sneaky. If God can write virtue into the story without anyone finding out about it, that's how he's going to do it.
I'm gonna still push back on the sneaky thing. I think
Oh,
I think
I
I think
love
I think there's
the best
no.
storytellers.
I'm gonna
Go
make a
ahead.
different case now.
Come at me.
I think it's like we're babies and we don't have any object permanence, and we're being played peekaboo with. That might be the closest thing. And it's like, man, all the secret stuff is happening behind the scenes, disappearing and reappearing.
It's like Gandalf in The Hobbit. Yeah.
Like Tom Bombadil is running Middle Earth the entire time, and nobody knows it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I don't know, I'm trying to pull this back to Chesterton just in the sense that like I think what he lays out is kind of a good rubric or a good test of like once again, I think it comes down to idolatry for me. But like even the idea of like, God being sneaky, which, to steel man Neil here a little bit, it's that, this is a proverb that it's the glory of God to hide a thing, and it's the, glory of man to seek it out. And so, yeah, there is this dance that happens. And I think if you've had a personal relationship with God or a religion or the church, I think that you've probably seen that or felt that. And in a lot of ways, like you could probably say that all religious activity is kind of back to that seeking out and that kind of ebb and flow. Because if everybody was just in tune, in flow, if everybody was Buddha or if everyone was Christ, there wouldn't, there would just be repetition or something, like it would just be kind of a stale, like you get the idea of like an infinite library or an infinite hall where everything is exactly the same, and there's no reason for it to be infinite because you have all the information in the first copy. So there's like a redundancy issue there. But then on the other hand, if everything, it's like the guy that's the guy at the beginning of the chapter that says like no two things in the world are alike. It's like all chairs are different. When it's like you can't, you can't say also that like all of reality is a variety. And so yeah, there's a sense in which like that ebbing and flowing of God and the felt presence of God or the divine is what kind of instigates that. I think what instigates that like desire to chase and that desire to, commit to some sort of religious practice. And like I would wonder, I mean, we know that Chesterton ends up, going with the one true holy Catholic Church.
And I think it's really obvious this chapter. I think he goes down certain paths where it's like, okay, I can see where you're going here.
The Joan of Arc thing alone is like, if you're gonna like, love Joan of Arc, you got to be either like French or Catholic. Like that's where that ends up, like, and glory to God for Joan. I think she's a really cool gal. But I was actually thinking about that driving to go pick up my wife was Joan of Arc, because I wonder, like, this whole chapter in a sense brings up the issue of self-awareness for me, which is the idea of understanding how you're doing really, is difficult, and it's even, I think it's sometimes it's obvious, but sometimes it's obviously bad.
Well, this is why Chesterton talked about the Mad as a Hatter thing, right? It's the measuring of the head.
My best barometer of that in the last 7 years of my life has been my level of resentment. Like
Mm.
that has been, I knew it was okay to come out of the lurk when my resentment had gone down a sufficient amount.
What were you
And,
resentful of? Resentful. Why did I say that weird? What were you resentful of?
the epistle this week was a thorn in the flesh, and
I
I'm
see.
gonna be equally cryptic.
I see.
And
Yeah.
and it's but I, Bishop Barron actually at 20 minutes before this, I finished listening to Bishop Barron's sermons, and he has his moments. And the sermon this week about the thorn in the flesh was like, yeah, that's it. It's the thing that we do not understand that inevitably pulls us back to God. Now, it could do the opposite. It could do the Cain. If you do well, would you not be accepted? We talked about Cain. Well, yeah, before we hit record. But in my case, it increased my faith dramatically, and that's the thing that we do not understand in the story, sneakily making its way into our heart. Yeah.
Well, that's the whole thing, like standing at the crossroads, right? Where when you're presented with this, the response isn't to just stand there forever and to contemplate. Sometimes you just have to move and do something. And
Or
it's
else you're
almost
gonna
like
get run over.
yeah. And this is what I said this week was that I don't know, or maybe it was this week, maybe it was last week. I was going through a really hard day, and I came to the realization that, like, man, all I need is someone just to tell me it's going to be okay. That was it. Like, I just needed that reassurance. Like, once I had that reassurance, I can do whatever. Um, but when I didn't feel like things were going to be okay, that's when everything kind of just collapsed and stops. It's like once I have faith that the end is going to be where I need to be, then I can keep on moving.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and take full responsibility for that. I should have, texted you at some point and just said it's gonna be okay.
Oh gosh.
I think we
It
all share
turns
in that
out
one.
turns out McMosev's actually Tom Bombadil, and we're all living
No.
in McMosev's reality here. So.
Yeah, no. I'm not that creative. Also I don't like myself enough to give myself as good of friends as you guys are. So very blessed in that regard. I don't think I could have you know, created this better if I had had.
Well,
But yeah, like I think the resentment thing is a good test. I think that what you said too, Noah, like I just want someone to tell me it's going to be okay. My memory might be misserving me, but I feel like that is something that I used to think a lot, especially like early on in my marriage and stuff like that, kind of dealing with the loneliness of just, I was used to either living with my family or living in a room full of, a house full of other dudes. And so then I was like just with my wife or by myself most of the time. And that was like a hard transition. And so I felt a little bit of like a loneliness there, I guess. I didn't know that at the time, but I feel now, maybe within the last 3 or 4 years, whenever I start feeling like that, it kind of gets on that rhythm of like the Lord peeking his head out behind the curtain or whatever. But there's a sense in which I know what I'm meant to think in that moment, which is it will be okay. Like all shall be well. And so then the fact that I'm unwilling to just think that and believe that, and actually believe it, I think is I don't want to go so strong as to call it a failure, but that kind of fear of that being a failure is what kind of constitutes the game at that point. And then it's a drawing back, it's a returning home. There's all of those kind of metaphors that you could reach for, I guess. But yeah, like
You kind of missed the discussion on failure, because I talked a little bit about that, but it was,
oh, okay.
I think my takeaway in my own experience, I talked about my game development experience, failing,
Big time
is
failure.
100%. Like everything I've set my mind to in game development thus so far, I have failed at. And the joy is knowing that I failed that much and I still have like faith. And I'm not saying faith in game development per se. I'm more like faith in that the road is good. And I
Yep.
you know, like I'm gonna fall off the road, but the road is good. There's a road. And I would say just assume whatever you're going through, just assume you're gonna fail. Assume like it's gonna happen. And but also assume like it's on you to get back up again. That's it.
Right. Well, is that what Chesterton's talking about too, with like the whole discussion on will and like the ways in which like someone like Nietzsche who puts everything on the will, or Schopenhauer, will and representation. That like, I'm not surprised that Bishop Barron's sermon was good either. You sounded somewhat surprised. You probably listened to a lot more of him than I do have, but he seems to like be pretty good. I don't know. Be surprised if he said something that wasn't interesting.
I texted PVK. I have PVK's number.
Whoa,
I
no
do
need to
not
brag, dude.
I
No
do
need to
not
brag. Whoa.
I do not want to abuse the privilege. I do not want to, and he never responds to me anyway, so I'm not abusing the privilege. But I've only texted him like 3 times. And one was him making a face or he was joking about somebody else's face, and I sent him a text of a screenshot I took where his face was like he was in the middle of sneezing or something, and his nose was all he was like this at the person he was talking to. I was like, those in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. But then the other thing I texted him was about, I've been following like Bishop Barron over the last 5 or so years. And I remember when he was at maybe 300,000 subs when JBP broke 1 million. And then Bishop Barron about 3-4 months ago broke 1 million subs. And now he's over 1.3 million in 3 months. And I texted PVK and I said, what happens when a single bishop becomes the voice that is even stronger than, say, the Pope?
A
And
first among equals, you might say.
yeah, no, but seriously, we live in an unprecedented time where it's like, what if Word on Fire Ministries becomes too potent? Like what does that mean to become too powerful of individual ministry? I have
Yeah.
we're in uncharted waters, right? Like
I don't know. Is it
historically.
that uncharted? I mean, for Catholics, I mean,
Mhm.
they've got Chesterton. They had Thomas Aquinas was not the Pope. Like Augustine was not the Pope.
Yeah, but all
Uh,
those things were posthumous. It was posthumous, man. Like you didn't
yeah,
have.
but
Yeah.
Aquinas was not posthumous. Aquinas, he was a
No,
big deal.
okay, the closest modern equivalent that I know of, and I am not well versed. Kale would be much better versed in Catholic, even recent Catholic history than me. I'm not, but I am aware of Fulton Sheen and his popularity on just regular TV in the 60s. Very, very popular. And I do, my understanding is that Fulton Sheen made some enemies because of that, because of his popularity.
Right. Well, I think
Yeah.
that's, that's also, at least from my, you understand the history of the Catholic Church way more than me, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
like, even I just think of like even Thomas Merton, like it, because he
Mm.
became very popular in his life, but he was also submitted to the church, and the church basically told him when and when not to write books. They basically, he wanted to be a hermit for like the last 15 or 20 years of his life or something like that. I don't remember the exact time range, but at the end of his life, he really wanted to be a hermit, and they didn't really give him permission to do that until like right before he died, which he died young too. Suspicious things about how he died. I'll leave that for a different podcast or whatever. But if you want to go find it out. But the point I'm trying to make is that like it seems like, because he also had the like members of the Catholic Church kind of not wanting him to be their voice. I think like and then you have the whole thing with the Jesuits. So I feel like like the spooky, scary Jesuits. But like I don't know. I guess in my outsider's perspective, like if Bishop Barron gets too big for his britches, or the other guy who's much more controversial, I can't remember even his name, but the one who like I think he got like defrocked or something recently, but he was kind of getting a little too big for his britches down in Texas. But yeah, I think that like maybe it's a miracle, but the Catholic Church seems to weather pretty much every storm. You know, it's like you've had some pretty bad popes. You've had some worse bishops probably. Uh, but like also that's not the point because that's just the church, you know, the actual universal church, scattered among the earth, you know. Uh, like there's always the wheat always grows up with the tares in that sense. Um, but yeah, I don't know. What popped to my mind again was like the whole like virtue thing because I'm like, is Bishop Barron virtuous? You know, like is he
I hope so.
does
Yeah,
he
I
deserve
hope
his
so.
acclaim kind of a thing, you know?
Yeah,
Because
yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
Well,
From afar, he seems to be, yes, but
I
you know,
mean,
only yeah,
one
God will tell.
interesting part too is the opening quote I read was what got me into reading this book in the first place. And the person who read that quote, and heard it first, was Ravi Zacharias. And very much along similar lines here, where there's like, okay, well, man, not everybody, a large number of people thought that he was on the up and up. And then I think for the most part, people have agreed that he was not. And so there's a certain amount of like, you never know. And you sometimes just have
It's
to live with it and just be wise and live your life and not be overly doubtful of people and overly suspicious, but also be not stupid and be willing to walk along with everything. So
We could go back on Chesterton. I do have one more thought on talking about my church, if you
sure.
guys want to hear it, which is
Do
that
it.
I think the single most damaging thing that the Catholic Church is clearly responsible for, in no small part, is the child sex abuse scandals over the last 20, 30 years. Um, I think of Jesus's own quote where he says, you know, if you lead these little ones astray, it would have been better for you to have a lodestone hung around a millstone, forget what
Yeah.
it is, hung around your neck and then thrown into the sea. And um, but I also see in the process, I see a lot of people who use that as an excuse to walk away from their faith.
Mm.
And I see that and I think to myself, well, you know, who's left? So the people who stay, um, you know, outside world would probably call them, oh, you know, you're in a corrupt tradition and it's full of pedophiles and this and that and da 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 da. And but the people who stay, they truly believe, you know, they believe. Um, and I've started thinking about instead of the church as a thing you have to do in order to get into heaven. I shouldn't say I start that. I've been thinking about this way for a long time, but um, I really try to think of the church as the set of practices and the set of things that are my best bet to staying on that path. The path that I inevitably am going to fall off and come back onto. And so in regards to things like the pet, you know, the child sex abuse stuff, I know that it is safer today in the church than it's ever been because of that. So it's the exact opposite because of that. And um I'm trying to think of the reason that I even wanted to talk about this in the first place. It was related to, yes, I know what it was. It was the fact that we put this price on our priests within Catholicism, where we say you have to be separate, you have to be celibate. And I think the price of that divide is like is setting aside in holiness is it's a heavy burden, but I don't know, like that was one of these things, and I texted Luke about this. Like initially when I was joining the Catholic Church, I was thinking to myself, like, do I really agree with this? Da, 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 da. And as time goes on, I'm thinking to myself like that set asideness, like that absolute commitment to say, I'm going to take the thing that I value most on this earth, let's say, and I'm going to sacrifice that, and I'm going to pursue the highest, whatever that is. I don't know. it might be it might actually be necessary to pursue the highest. So what am I saying? I don't even know what I am saying. So with Bishop Barron, for instance, like the Zacharias stuff, I don't think a Bishop Barron would fall into the same temptations that a Ravi Zacharias would fall into. And I could be wrong, but simply because of that divide, because of the natural and it's the same thing with JBP actually. Like he for 20, 30 years, like he was just a married guy living his life as a professor before all this crazy fame came to Peterson. Um, and that's some good armor. Like it's some good defense to ensure that you stay on the right path because the tradition locks you in to it's the whole concept of, you know, if your eye is sinning, pluck it out. If you're, you know,
Well, one thing
yeah.
that strikes me, and this feels like a new thought, but it also feels like I may have thought this before. But I almost get the sense that it might be the best thing in the world for the truth about Ravi to come
forth.
to the light,
Yeah.
rather than there be room for hagiography in that sense.
Oh yeah.
And so for me, it more because like, you know, the celibacy thing is obviously it's like a circumcision thing. Like what matters is actually the heart, right? Like Bishop Barron could have far more temptations in that regard than Ravi. And it may have been that Ravi was able to not deal with those temptations because he, you know, placed them all in one spot, kind of a thing. And so he's like, this is my area of sin. And so the rest of me can be this polished, smart guy. And so there's like, I don't think it's worth kind of parsing out those two people like Ravi may have, you know, like it's the same guy, right? But like, I do think that it's a good reminder for me of like, that it actually has to do with, obviously it's a sin issue, right? Like there's sin going on. And so that's what we don't want to see is like these famous men, we don't want to see them sin, you know, like, and we don't want to see ourselves sin either. But there is this weird thing, like we start holding people to a higher standard. And I think that it's right to do that, you know, like the more attention you have on you, the higher standard you should be held to. And the
those who
more
have
authority
much is
you have,
expected. Yeah.
yeah. But like in the back of my mind, there's always like that possibility, right? That you know, that a couple of good liar, like that good liars are really good at lying. And you know, and that like there's I'm sure that there's like a Michael Jordan of liars out there. And it's not my mother-in-law. Just kidding.
No relation.
Yeah, I'm not related to them. Oh yeah, neither are you. But yeah, like, so yeah, I don't know. I think what makes this difficult is like I've Chesterton in the back of my mind being like, yeah, there is the possibility to judge or whatever. There is the possibility to say like that Tolstoy, you know, was a was a part of the bourgeois and doesn't understand real suffering, and that, you know, that Nietzsche basically his brain was mush because he, you know, was an idolater or whatever, or autistic is also the way that Chesterton comes off, like frames Nietzsche, which is funny. But yeah, so like, yeah, the sense that it's your relationship to your own sin, and of course that means that it's also has to do with your relationship to God, because sin is kind of your relationship to God. And so if you're in sin, then, you know, that kind of idea of it almost doesn't matter what you do because you're doing it for the wrong reasons, or you've made an idol. But I don't know, the Catholic part of my consciousness Congress still says like it's better to do good, and you know that it's even if you're not totally feeling it, do it until you're you know, act until your will and your heart you know, agree or something like that. But yeah, so it seems like there are a lot of tactics to kind of get out of that sunken place of, at the end of thought or at the end of feeling or at the end of will. But I'm not sure if he actually outlines it in this chapter. But
No.
I think Joan of Arc is the model by the end, is that he says embody the best of both. Like he lays out the dead ends and says, well, it can't be. You have to move at the crossroads. You can't stand still, and that's where it kind of comes down to. You can't say no action is the right or all actions are right. Just like go down like a thunderbolt. Take the path and go. There was an interesting thing that came to my mind earlier, which was the Voltaire made a bunch of jokes in Candide about Leibniz indirectly, because Leibniz is famous for saying we live in the best of all possible worlds, and Voltaire takes it and he says, well, obviously we don't. Look at all these horrible things that happen every day, and people who die in war and all these things. And it's just a fundamental misreading of what Leibniz is saying. And I think that's part of it. It's partially optimistic and it's partially pessimistic. It's the we live in the best of all possible worlds and look at how broken this is, but yet it still is the best of all possible worlds. Like it could be a lot worse. This is the only way of it playing out. And it's a deep act of faith, I think, to say that we live in the best possible worlds, because it means that there must also be something guiding it. At least that's the way I put it. I don't know how much that connects with what we've been talking about, but it's just something that kept coming up, and it just popped into my mind again.
What did you make of no, go ahead if you have something.
I was just going to remark
related,
that yeah, the best of all possible worlds or worst of all possible worlds is definitely very much like a litmus test of like whether or not you're an optimist or a pessimist kind of at heart or whatever. But there is a part of me that would like to think that this is the worst of all possible worlds, that it's only up from here. But no, I think that well, I didn't want to bring any of my absurdism into this one, but like I more tend to say that it is the best and the worst possible of all possible worlds. And there's an amount of mediation that you control that, and there's an amount of restraint that you don't control. And so it's almost like we're infinitely free and infinitely constrained at the same time. And I think that that's all. Like, I didn't want to bring it in because I don't think that Chesterton makes that final leap of like, like that's my answer out of the pit, is that if reason, or like if reason can get you to basically lose your mind, and if focusing on just willing and doing, you'll lose the ability to do that. But then also just the idea of like not doing anything is also a choice, and like any action is, like marrying your wife is like you're saying no. You're always, any action is kind of cutting off all of the other possibilities. This is such a dense chapter. Good grief. Like all of this stuff is coming back for me now. But like, now I can't even remember what I started off saying there. But yeah, the absurdity thing. Because I don't know, like, from what I can tell, Joan of Arc, like if you'd asked Joan of Arc her experience of like what it was like, I'm not sure if she might have been like Kanye, she might have just been like, the world works for me, like whatever I want to do works, until the very end. But that's part of why she's a saint, right? Like, but yeah, I the whole Joan of Arc thing is interesting because I think I've read something or listened to something that made a pretty convincing case that she had some sort of mental illness, that she was, by today's standards or whatever, would have been considered bipolar or something another. Maybe schizophrenic, because doesn't she like see things? She sees the vision of the cross or whatever. But yeah, I'm not the biggest Joan of Arc knower.
I know very little about her. I know almost nothing about her, so I got to read up. Yeah.
Well, I knew that Chesterton liked her. And I've
do you know
at
who
one
else
point
likes her, though?
do what?
You know who else likes her? Very unexpected. Mark Twain is a big fan of Joan of Arc.
Oh, Mark Twain.
Mark Twain, famous critic of religion, wrote a whole biography on how amazing Joan of Arc is. It's just fascinating to me.
Yes, he twirled his mustache and
Yeah. Well, she's like a LGBTQ saint too for a lot of people, or like a feminist icon kind of a thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, fascinating figure.
I wanted to ask you guys, because there's another area I disagreed with Chesterton on. And is like you've said this a few times, McMo, which is that he slips into rhetoric, but then you find yourself thinking, do I actually agree with this? And this is one of those examples where I don't agree with him. But I bet you might. But that might be a difference in our
There we
respective
go.
values. And this
Ding,
is on
ding,
page
ding.
20. This is page 26 in my copy. I'm going to start with his very power of enjoyment destroys half his joys. By asking for pleasure, he lost the chief pleasure, for the chief pleasure is surprise. I see some value in that. I'm not even sure I disagree with that. In that, God being a sneaky storyteller, I am often happily surprised when things that I don't see a way out of present themselves, or the situation somehow improves in a way that I could not envision it improving. And I mean that in a myriad of ways, from the smallest thing of like, I have a game development problem that I do not know how to solve, to, that's a trivial example. But I mean, bigger situations where often the problem is a grace that leads to something else. And then, so it's not even the surprise, it's more of the, I would say, grace, for lack of a better word, because grace is always a surprise.
Mhm.
What if
Well, actually, yeah. So your absurdism, you would say, I expect the grace, it's coming. And I'm like, when you
Right.
do that.
Right. Well, it's not surprise if you're not surprised, like that's what's interesting about that. But I wonder if it would change for you if instead of surprise, it was novelty was the first word that came to my mind. But then catastrophe, which is Tolkien's famous phrase or word, that kind of when the night is at its darkest and suddenly the full light of the sun breaks across.
Look for me at the rising of the sun on the third
exactly.
day. Look
exactly.
to the east.
But then, it also just kind of strikes me as like the whole like just idea of dopamine. It's like you don't. I guess some people do get the dopamine of like doing the same thing, like a routine or a habit, like that can offer some. But that strikes me as much more like oxytocin, like that warm, comfortable, homey feeling. But like dopamine, pleasure, has to do with novelty, and there's a lot of things that come to mind now. But yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if I agree with Chesterton or not. That I guess it would depend on what he means by chief, right? Like the chief pleasure or is surprise.
No,
Yeah,
I
maybe
would
that.
say I would say I'm much more staunchly against novelty than I am surprise.
Mhm.
I'm a late adopter. It's not that I'm against new things. It's that my natural inclination is most of it will be regarded as a mistake eventually. Most of it, not all of it.
Read Ecclesiastes too much,
Well, right, but
Right.
that's what
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the surprise.
I'm an analog player in a digital world who does game development.
Yeah.
Very
Well, I just
strange. I'm a
to me,
very strange man.
novelty and surprise are connected, I guess, because it's just kind of the idea of like uh the expected versus the unexpected. I guess maybe that's how those are connected in my head.
Novelty is like the easiest way to think of surprise, where surprise can be a lot of other things. You can
Right.
be surprised by old things.
Yeah. Well, surprise has more to do probably with like expectation, right? Like it has to do with what
Yeah.
you're expecting. And the kind of the distance from what you were expecting kind of probably equals to the power of the surprise or something.
But would you say humility is a measure of that gap between expectation and reality. Or pride over humility is a measure of that gap.
Maybe I don't see the connection as much.
All right.
Um,
If
but
I like so doing my nightly prayers last night, I was like, thank you, God. I had such a good day. Like it was a really good day. But if you looked at my day from the outside world, you'd say like nothing really significant or important happened. But I had such a good day. But that's most days for me now. And I'm not saying I'm humble. I'm saying it's
Are too
far.
humble to claim being humble.
No, it's the gap between
I'll
where I
claim it.
was 7 years ago and where I am now. And I presume far less to know what's good for me now. I presume far less to know what's good for me now. I don't
Okay.
know. And so when good things happen that I guess there is a happy surprise when that happens, you know. And sometimes bad things happen. And it's like, okay, what do I need to learn? Like that, you know. But then also I notice these patterns in my life where these stints of darkness become shorter or they become predictable in some ways. Like I'll enter a stint of darkness and I'll say like, I've been here before. I recognize these woods. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've navigated these woods before. Um, and yeah, so in that way, then the darkness of the woods become map territory. And it's not to say that there isn't further lower to go and that I couldn't be brought lower still.
You're playing Dark Souls in real life.
Really? You keep going back to Dark Souls. I still haven't played it.
Oh, well, that was the part of the conversation I had with CJ or
Yeah.
Moralon, and we were talking about the whole thing with like mapping the territory. Same thing with like parkour.
Yeah.
You turn something that looks like an obstacle or like a inhibitor into part of your environment that you can do something with. So when you reconfigure the dark moments, you can see this as an opportunity versus a obstacle or an inhibitor or an attack against you. This is weird kind of Stockholm syndrome thing I was having whenever I played Dark Souls, where like I play a level enough times where certain enemies, my brain doesn't register them as enemies anymore. They're friends.
Hmm.
And I don't know what that was.
Yeah.
And so I
I
was trying to
remember you
communicate that.
mentioning that with, with, I always want to call him Morrowind.
Morrowind, yes.
Uh, but I hope he participates more in everything we're doing. But yeah, so that really is the adventure, I think, when something unexpected goes wrong. Sometimes it's an adventure when something unexpected goes right, but I don't know, it really is an adventure when something unexpected goes wrong because you don't have a story unless something unexpected goes wrong. So in some ways, maybe Chesterton is right in that the greatest joy is that surprise.
Well, he doesn't say the greatest joy, right? He says the greatest pleasure is
So I
surprise.
don't. I'm a bigger fan of joy.
Surprised by joy.
Surprise by joy. Yeah.
That happens to me a lot. Like I'm surprised I'm joyful. I'm like, why am I?
Oh,
Also,
weird.
that's a Lewis book, by the
yeah,
way.
C.S. famous C.S. Lewis book, Surprised by Joy.
Yeah.
Apparently not that famous.
Man, man, how much did he write? I've got.
He wrote a lot.
See if I have
I've read
Protestant
all
work ethic.
these.
I still
I
need to
got
read
all
this one.
these.
The correct
Yeah.
answer to how much he wrote is yes.
Yeah, exactly. One of the writers of all time.
You could say
Indeed.
that.
Let me go. I had some more questions. But I
Fire
think one
and
of
will,
them,
Commander.
Did I hear that you guys both had notes this time?
yeah, I have notes.
Dang.
Nobody notes
I'm going
the
no notes.
trouble
So,
I've seen.
so one of the things that Chesterton writes a lot about is about how he sees this dead end of thought about how it's coming. And he says it's already arrived, basically. He says, we've already reached it. We've asked all the questions. We've reached to the point where we're coming to a dead end. And he says this, like 100 years ago. But we still relate to it, I think. I mean, I think that's the vibe I'm getting, is that we're still relating to this to a certain extent, that this is also similar to the place where we find our culture. Is Chesterton wrong? Did it not find its end? Was he just a little off? Or are we in the same place and we're just kind of stuck?
Could have been done at 8100 with the writing of Revelation.
What?
Or 8080? You know, when the
88.
Bible was finished.
Mhm.
No,
Yeah.
sorry, when the Bible was finished written, then was it done?
Well, maybe not done, but like
What? I think he's right. Like, I'm not sure if there's been uh a radically new perspective on
Mhm.
what's going on between Chesterton and now. I think that in some ways he had no idea how bad it could get at this point, right? Like, this
Yeah.
is um
because I think it went further than that.
yeah, like it went way past just like men without chests. It went to men without heads, like and so like uh there's yeah. Um but in turn, like, philosophically, I'm not sure. Like, it's just been there's been a lot of recovery, it
Mhm.
seems like there's been a lot of, like, I think of Frankel, Man's Search for Meaning or whatever, that, the kind of reaping what we sow. That's the other thing that's always kind of weird for me, thinking about, to like pre World War I and World War II, to just like to think of like the idea of like National Socialism as like this great thing that would be like awesome, like and have like just we can't go
There's no
back to a
other
world
association.
yeah, like we can't go
Yeah.
back to a world in which like becoming a Nazi seems like the best option for you and your family. Like that doesn't. It's really difficult to actually go there, and I don't know to what extent like that makes anything that Chesterton said wrong. I just think that it, like, he probably, yeah, just like,
I'm gonna give one case,
because I don't
and
want to fall into the like perennialist thing. Sorry,
your
Neil.
word recovery's prompted in me. This is what
Okay,
Chad
good.
would say, but Chad has turned me into a believer. He has turned me, like, I am a believer. And Chad would say that the greatest innovation of the 20th century was the foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't know if it was the greatest innovation. I don't know. I know it's one of the greatest innovations, if not the greatest. And 1939. What's ironic about it is that it started in no small part due to the Oxford group, which is an early Christian. The whole point of the Oxford group was to live like the earliest Christians, like the smallest bands of Christians. So they aspired to live as like St. Paul's time.
Mhm.
And so I think the chief innovation there was that the only way to save an alcoholic is through another alcoholic. And the only way for that alcoholic to be saved is to save other alcoholics. And it was this remarkable. I find that to be an absolutely remarkable innovation, because it puts the onus. It goes back to this model of church as something I get versus a way I must be. It reverses. I really want to plant the seed in the corner, generally speaking. The direction of the relationality matters so much, so much. This is like one of my hills to die on. Like we always say, like, reality is relational, but reality is relational inward out, is what I'm saying. Is that you become what comes out of your heart, what comes out of your mouth, what comes out of your hands, and that is the chief innovation of Alcoholics Anonymous, I would say. Like this Catholic retreat that was hugely formative for me in 2018, which I now participate in my local community, and after doing it this year, like I'm all in. We're going to do it every year, because you can only go on it once, and then you have to serve on the team in order to keep going, because it's basically meant to be that experience for people. And Like I can't even tell you the reasons why, but I'm convinced that whoever started this retreat, like they were either former members of AA or they knew AA inside and out. I can't tell you exactly why I'm convinced of that, but there are certain things where it's like boom.
Or
Anyway.
Neil, get this. They both have their origins in the same place.
No, there were things I forget what it was, but I was like, no, that's directly from AA, whatever it was. Yeah, it's the stripping away of all excuses. There was somebody said this in a recent conversation that philosophers invented philosophy to make excuses why they didn't need to change.
Sounds familiar.
Somebody
Was that
mentioned that. I thought it was a great quote. I
I
love
think
that.
that was on Karen Wong. Was
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, I
but
think
she was
yeah, it was
quoting somebody
Sevilla.
else.
It was Sevilla and Karen Wong. That's
Yeah,
where it was. Yeah, it was the latest
which was that?
conversation.
I think that was a replay.
Really? No, I don't think
Yeah,
so.
because they were talking about Chino like it had happened last month.
No, they were reminiscing.
I don't know. I started listening to it and I was like, oh, this is a replay. But then I just kept listening because it was so good. So I was like, oh, I'll listen to it again. Whatever.
It's not a
Uh,
replay.
yeah, I guess I feel pulled between the kind of idea of like there's nothing new under the sun, but then also the kind of perennialism that says like, because yeah, like Chesterton said, we've already reached the end of thought, and it still feels like we're reaching the end of thought, but every couple of months, something like LLMs or the blockchain like proposes to radically change what it means to be human, and it never does. Like it's still, at least from my perspective, it's still a bunch of sinners, hurting each other's feelings and offering love and care and support and in all of it. But yeah, because but then it's also like you don't want to say that also is like always, like you can't say that it's just like always the same, that nothing ever happens. Like there is a development. The time moves in one direction. Uh and it's different living in 2024 than it was living in 1884 or whatever. And that difference can't be primarily just the amount of history now. Like there's I'm sure that there's a lot of differences. But then also it's like different for who? Like who is this imaginary person that can time travel and is like, gonna be uncomfortable where they're at? It's like every individual is where they are. And I think this actually gets back to, I guess, my view on the whole kind of like how does sanctification take place, or like what was Joan of Arc thinking in her head, like even that kind of question, which is like I think that it's the Christian responsibility and the Christian duty is to believe that you're right where God wants you. And obviously, like, there's caveats. Like, you're not right where God wants you while you're sinning. But if you were to have that thought while you were sinning, that might actually provoke repentance, quicker than it would have had you put off that fact that God is watching you and at the very least permitting you to do what you are doing. So that kind of like omnipresence, but also like omnibenevolence, um, and we should say omnipotence too. Like to me, that's what makes, like that's what I think it must have been like for Joan of Arc, was that kind of imagined synchronicity between your will and God's will, so that thy will be done uh is not said like Christ in the garden, or I mean maybe it is like to some extent, but I think it's obvious in the garden that Christ did not want to, there was something that he wasn't looking forward to. So yeah, like that I assume that that's kind of like as close of an approximation to what it would be like to be a saint that I could think of, is just that kind of idea, like you said, like not, like you said, no, not standing at the crossroads, but always acting, always loving, always kind of in the dance. not getting distracted. Yeah. I think that's all I had to say. I also have to go to the bathroom. So I'm kind of, as my bladder fills up, it's taking a lot of the blood that is supposed to go to my brain to help me think good. That's scientific.
Think well.
Okay.
I can't think well because I drink well.
It's all right. My brain's basically taffy.
Well, if we're, I don't know how you all feel. I think we've covered a lot of ground. We can start to close it out here. I might read one kind of a larger section real fast because I think
Do it.
It's hard not to. The last paragraph I think is just so killer. So, okay. I think it's fitting. Here I end, thank God, the first and dullest business of the book. The rough review of recent thought. After this, I begin to sketch a view of life which might not interest my reader, but which at any rate interests me. In front of me, as I close this page, is a pile of modern books that I have been turning over for the purpose. A pile of ingenuity, a pile of futility. By the accident of my present detachment, I can see the inevitable smash of the philosophies of Schopenhauer and Tolstoy, Nietzsche and Shaw, as clearly as an inevitable railway smash could be seen from a balloon. They're on the road to the emptiness of the asylum, for madness may be defined as using mental activity as to reach mental helplessness, and they have nearly reached it. He who thinks he is made of glass thinks the destruction of thought, for glass cannot think. So he who wills to reject nothing wills the destruction of will. For will is not only the choice of something, but the rejection of almost everything. And as I turn and tumble over the clever, wonderful, tiresome, and useless modern books, the title of one of them rivets my eye. It is called Jeanne d'Arc by Anatole France. I've only glanced at it, but a glance was enough to remind me of Renan's Vie de Jesus. It has the same strange method of the reverent skeptic. It discredits supernatural stories that have some foundation by telling natural stories that have no foundation. Because we cannot believe in what a saint did, we are to pretend that we know exactly what he felt. But I do not mention either book in order to criticize it, but the accidental combination of the names called up two startling images of sanity, which blasted all the books before me. Joan of Arc was not struck at a crossroads. I was not stuck at a crossroads, either by rejecting all paths like Tolstoy or by accepting all of them like Nietzsche. She chose a path and went down it like a thunderbolt. Yet Joan, when I came to think of her, had in her all that was true in Tolstoy or Nietzsche, all that was even tolerable in either of them. I thought of all that is noble in Tolstoy, the pleasure in plain things, especially plain pity, the actualities of the earth, the reverence for the poor, the dignity of the bowed back. Joan of Arc had all of that, with this great addition, that she endured poverty as well as admiring it. Whereas Tolstoy is only a typical aristocrat, trying to find out its secrets. And then I thought of all that was brave and proud and pathetic in poor Nietzsche, and his mutiny against the emptiness and timidity of her time. I thought of his cry for the ecstatic equilibrium of danger, his hunger for the rush of great horses, his cry to arms. Well, Joan of Arc had all of that. And again, with this difference, that she did not praise fighting, but fought. We know that she was not afraid of the army, while Nietzsche, for all we know, was afraid of a cow. Tolstoy only praised the peasant. She was the peasant. Nietzsche only praised the warrior. She was the warrior. She beat them both at their own antagonistic ideals. She was more gentle than the one and more violent than the other. Yet she was a perfectly practical person who did something, while they were wild speculators who did nothing. It is impossible that the thought should not cross my mind that she and her faith had perhaps some secret of moral unity, and a unity that has been lost. And with that thought came a larger one, and the colossal figure of her master also crossed the theater of my thoughts. The same modern difficulty which darkened the subject matter of Anatole France also darkened that of Ernest Renan. Renan also divided his hero's pity from the hero's pugnacity. Renan even represented the righteous anger at Jerusalem as a mere nervous breakdown after the idyllic expectations of Galilee, as if there were any inconsistency between having a love for humanity and having a hatred for inhumanity. Altruists with thin, weak voices denounce Christ as an egoist. Egoists with thinner and weaker voices denounce him as an altruist. In our present atmosphere, such cavils are comprehensible enough. The love of a hero is more terrible than the hatred of a tyrant. The hatred of a hero is more generous than the love of a philanthropist. There is a huge and heroic sanity of which moderns can only collect the fragments. There is a giant of whom we see only the lopped arms and legs walking about. They have torn the soul of Christ into silly strips, labeled egoism and altruism, and they are equally puzzled by his insane magnificence and his insane meekness. They have parted his garments among them, and for his vesture they have cast lots, though the coat was without seam, woven from the top throughout.
Emit a joyous noise unto the Lord.
I didn't want to be the one who broke the silence.
You brought the mic to your face. You gotta go for it.
Um, all that strikes me right now, well, yeah, the insane meekness and the insane power. Insane. I don't think he chose that. He chooses his words very carefully. But I also just keep thinking about effective altruism and how that's kind of like for your neck of the woods, Noah, that's like the, big thing. Or at least like for, like tech bros or whatever, like the modern utopia, like where effective altruism is supposed to be like the tippy top of like, you know, ethical thinking these days or something. It's like give well is like the better than the church ever could be or was, because there's numbers attached to it now. And then the egoists, I keep thinking of like Ayn Rand and the kind of how just off-putting that type of thinking can be. Yeah, very. I mean, man, he just has a way with words, don't he?
Mm-hmm. Sure does.
Found Ayn Rand very comforting when I was feeling resentful at the world. She was a nice warm blanket.
Yeah, she probably made you feel like you were pretty grateful compared to her. Actually, I shouldn't say that because I haven't really read much of Ayn Rand. I just think of her as like more resentful than Nietzsche and just kind of like middle finger up to the world, like stick it to the universe, be your own Ubermensch. Uh, you know, shrug, like Atlas, shrug.
Hmm.
It's good to have ideological prisms in order to see the world so that you can compare and contrast various ideological prisms.
What did you find comforting about Ayn Rand?
Oh, if I felt like the whole world felt entitled, that, like if I was busting my ass and not seeing the fruits of my labor, it was nice to know that I wasn't alone. That way of thinking. But you're right. A lot of that Randian way of thinking is rooted in resentment. It's rooted in the resentment of those who are receiving without giving, and it's a desire to immanentize the eschaton in bringing that divine justice of we're all going to reap what we deserve here on this earth. That's the Randian vision. And so you could the far left side of the political spectrum is, it's the same concept that we're going to immanentize the eschaton, and everyone born into privilege will get their just fruits, and everyone who, well, but both of those dogmatic lenses in which to see the world are mainly rooted in resentment. Is what I'm saying. It's looking at the other and saying, why do they have and I don't have, whatever that is. So fundamentally, that's a mistrust of God, or that's a rejection of God to say, I reject the world as it is. I reject, this is not a moral world. It's not a good world, whatever it is. Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah.
I relate to finding comfort in Rand at certain points in my life of being able to like similarly. I was in a place where a lot of the kind of more left-leaning politics was taken for granted. And so to hear someone who is able to be critical and provide an alternative vision was pretty like, okay, like this is useful in at least evening out, like feeling somewhat balanced now. Um, because when you have students and teachers both agreeing on everything, that's where I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel right. Like it feels like I need someone who's like who is the other voice who's able to say something else. So
I guess I came up in the well, no, that's not even fair to say because yeah, I don't know. My relationship with the right and the left, I guess, is just hard to put into words. Uh, Definitely don't really feel at home in either. Um, but also, you know, most of my teachers in high school or whatever were far more conservative, like very, very conservative.
mhm.
And then I went to the whole other extreme in college. Art school, very, very liberal. Um, but yeah, I guess by the time I would have started feeling lonely because of stuff like that, I think I had enough podcasts by that point. Like like I could do like Pete Holmes, You Made It Weird, and I could do like Joe Rogan, and I could do Ben Shapiro, and like I could get the gambit of like different voices, I guess. But then philosophically, I guess I've just never found what is her thing? It's objectivism.
Yeah,
I think
objectivism.
so.
Yeah. I think just the defenders of objectivism, I've just always felt a little bit are just distasteful.
It's all
Okay.
pretty distasteful, but
There's
Yeah.
not a lot of forgiveness. I think that's my main issue.
Yeah.
In either one of you can that's I got to think about that more, but maybe that's a really good benchmark of measuring an ideology is how they treat and forgive their enemies.
yeah,
Um, yeah,
grace.
yeah,
It's this whole thing of like squeezing somebody until they fit your mold, let's say.
yeah.
I've always kind of I relate to like falling back on like podcasts that sort of give you like say the alternate take to kind of get a little bit more comfort out of it. But it was ultimately just kind of squeezing you into a new shape that you didn't necessarily fit the whole way and kind of robbing you of the ability to just sort of I don't know if I'd say see life as it is, but just kind of take it as it comes to a certain extent. Just I don't know, rather than let yourself be kind of enchanted by things, just kind of cynically look at things as like, this is serving this agenda, you know? I'm gonna feed this program into my mind that removes all of the stuff that I don't like and adds in things that aren't necessarily there. It's not that deep. Stop overthinking it. Oh my gosh. Well, not overthinking it. I'm not even like yes, there is sort of the overthinking, but it's also just the very I don't know reductionist thinking. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what this has to do with much, but
Measuring your own head.
measuring your own head. There you go.
What was I think it was in this passage, this chapter too. It's oh man, I have to find it or I'm gonna go crazy.
All right, I'm gonna go pee.
Go
Okay.
pee.
How dare you?
I
He
can
may
say
be
my
gone.
good stuff while he's off.
Don't say anything mean about me.
But one word may be added. At the beginning of this preliminary negative sketch, I said that our mental ruin has been wrought by wild reason, not wild imagination. A man does not go mad because he makes a statue a mile high, but he may go mad thinking it out in square inches. I think that captures what I was thinking of.
No kidding.
An excess of reason, not an excess of silliness, ridiculousness.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
well, we haven't gone too much into this, and again, we're kind of fluctuating on ending and not. But he talks a lot about like his whole goal is a defensive reason, of a properly ordered reason, and not totally against it. I think he tries to lay it out here, and that's part of it. It's the he doesn't have a problem with it being a mile high, but it's it. If you try to think it out in square inches, you're now overanalyzing to the point that you're not going to be able to properly see the picture. It's the forest for the trees, or any one of these.
I liked on the conclusion, I liked when he was talking about Joan of Arc, being there fighting in the thick of it, you know, picking up a sword. I always want to say a sword. Picking up a sword and fighting, and
That's so much better. Speaking of sword fighting,
yeah, and release the hounds, or the Kraken. That would be a number 2 in yeah. Anyway, he forgot to use his bidet, so he's got to go and bidet to you, sir. No, what I want to say is being in the thick of it. It reminded me of something that it was David. I think it was David Busatil, who had a conversation with Chad. I think that's where I got this from. But David Busatil was talking about King David at his worst moment should have been out with his troops fighting, and instead was at his palace, kind of looking around, seeing what was good. And anyway, it was the proclivity we have to talk and cast judgment and not be doing.
Yeah.
Y'all know what you be doing.
It's like,
get to it.
I could be editing my video, but you know, maybe I'll just hang around and browse YouTube for a while, you know.
Well, you are making the necessary and noble sacrifice of rereading the most important book in your life, such that we mere peons can benefit from the wisdom of your aged experience.
I'm not talking about this. This is actually doing something. It's more of the watching a Mr. Beast video or something. That's just
dang, you watch Mr. Beast videos, Noah?
It's because he's 14. That's why.
Come on, dude.
Well, I
I've
don't
grown to expect
anymore.
more from you.
I don't anymore. I don't. They hit
Repent.
my dopamine
Repent.
Mr. Mark of the Beast himself.
Oh, God.
His name is John Mark of the Beast.
All right, y'all. I probably got to
Yeah,
go.
I think that serves as a good end.
My goodness.
Thank you all for watching, and yeah, we'll be back with chapter 4, the ethics of Elfland. So
I'll see what I can join. I think I'll be back in this country by chapter 8 for the grand finale. But if I can join, I will. But I don't know what my itinerary is going to be because I trust him. Yeah,
sounds good. Whatever works. So
thank you.
bye.